So now finally, we're going to get into adding the data source. And there are two types of data you can add. You can add structured data, which is data that Zoho Analytics is familiar with. So it knows what type it is. It knows the hierarchy of what are parent records and child records. And that's a very straightforward import process. And then there's unstructured data, which you have to kind of help Zoho Analytics and tell it what kind of data it is before you can import it. And then finally, I'll walk through a snapshot as well. So starting off with our structured data, I'm going to import data from Zoho projects. And the use case here would be, I have my CRM data in Zoho Analytics already. You can relate a project to a deal, and I would want to figure out which projects were the most profitable per deal by looking at the labor hours logged against the project. So I'm going to import the project data, the tasks, and the time logs. And then I'll have data from Zoho projects and data from Zoho CRM that I can use to link up, and then I'll be able to get some insight into how profitable each deal was. So for any data source, when you click on it from the menu here, you're going to get this pop-up, and the pop-up is so you can give permission to Zoho Analytics in order to actually access the data in the data source that you're trying to set up. For a Zoho project, it's pretty straightforward. Since you're already logged into a Zoho account, Zoho Analytics is able to access that data pretty easily. For a third-party source, for example, Google Analytics, you'd still get this window, and then when you hit the next button, you'd get a pop-up which would take you just into sign into your Google account. And that's a way of authorizing Zoho Analytics to have permission to look at that Google Analytics data. But in this case, it's pretty straightforward. You just hit the next button. So from here, after we've authorized the data source, we're going to pick the data that we actually want to bring into Zoho Analytics. Since we're using project data, I'm going to choose all my projects and pick new projects automatically. These two windows here are commonplace for pretty much every structured data source. And this is where you pick from within the source, the modules. So we have Zoho projects that holds a bunch of different types of data, like projects, milestones, tasks, task comments, stuff like that. And we don't necessarily want to bring all that data in. You might, but also Zoho Analytics can only hold so many rows of data before you need to bump up your subscription. So if you don't think you need this data at the moment, you don't have to bring it in, and that will save you some space. You can always go back and edit this data source later and bring in more data if you need. Now within each module, you can pick which fields you're bringing in. And this is a little more interesting because you do not, or your subscription does not change depending on how many fields worth of data that you bring in. So if you, in this case, we have 4 projects, so that would be 4 rows. It wouldn't matter if we brought in 28 fields or we brought in 2. It's still 4 rows of data, and that's how your subscription counts it. So for fields, you're encouraged to choose any fields that you might want. Same with modules, you can always go back and edit which fields are being brought in. However, there's less guesswork involved with bringing in a field. If you're not sure, just bring it in and there's really no cost to it. And you'll notice as I scroll through these, some modules and fields are checked off by default, and you actually can't change that. That is just data that's required by the data source. So it had my tasks and it had my projects, but it didn't have my time logs yet. So I just went through there and made sure those were brought in for the reports that I would be creating. Next, you'll choose how often this data is synced to Zoho Analytics. More often than not, we will pick hourly, 1 hour, or just as frequently as possible to make sure the data is up to date as possible. The options you get here depend on your subscription. So if you don't see 1 hour, you'll probably see 3 hours or something like that. And you can make it as frequent as possible. And then finally, it gives you this option here to create default reports. So this is a really interesting feature for structured data sources, where after the data is imported, it can create some basic reports for you. And these would be things like top 10 products in your QuickBooks instance, which is pretty simple and straightforward. But it has two benefits. It saves you from creating that report yourself that you'd more likely than not be creating. And it also creates some reports for you to reference and take a look at. And you can go in behind the scenes and see how these reports are designed. And that will help you when you're creating new reports down the line. So after all that, I'm going to finally hit create here and get the Zoho projects data into the data source. Okay, now I'm going to import some unstructured data. So this is data that Zoho Analytics needs a little more help with, and you have to tell it what data types each of the columns in your file is. So a common use case for this would be, I moved from a previous CRM to Zoho CRM, and my old CRM doesn't connect with Zoho Analytics, but does provide an export of the data. So I could import this data into Zoho Analytics, do some transforms on it. For example, filter out inactive customers or normalize phone and email data. And then it's in good shape to be imported into Zoho CRM from there. So to do this, you're going to choose a file. I'll call my table old contacts. I dragged my file into the file picker here and it's ready to go. So here is where you're going to be helping Zoho Analytics a little more. The first row of the file does have the column names. If I did have a date column in my data, I would have to specify the date format, like month, /day, /year, for example. And then here, this is very straightforward data. A lot of it is just plain text. You can see there's an email column, and the email column Zoho has detected as the email data type. And these data types are good, but they're a bit of a double-edged sword because, for example, if I had a row where the email was considered invalid by Zoho, but I still wanted to import it, I wouldn't be able to do that using this email data type. I would have to use plain text instead. So it's a choice. You can pick the email data type and then it will adhere to strict validation rules, or you can pick the plain text data type to make it a bit more flexible. And these import errors are where the validation is going to come into play. So the most flexible option is to set that column for the row with the error as just empty instead of trying to import the data. So this is what I mean, where if I still wanted that invalid email, I would have to pick plain text instead. The next error, you could skip the row entirely, or you could stop the import entirely, go back and try again. So from here, I'm just going to hit create there, and it has imported my data. So in this scenario, it was a one-time import, and it makes sense because I had an export that I want to transform a little bit before I do something with it. Similar to the structured data, it does auto-generate some reports. I will click yes, because why not? And it's gone ahead and created a pretty good report. The permission sets of my old contacts and how many contacts were in each. So that's great. If I had some unstructured data that I wanted to import on a schedule, I could instead use the cloud storage data source or something like an FTP server or a feed. And then these are sources, since they are online, that Zoho Analytics can pull on a schedule, and then the data can be updated hourly or daily as needed. So now I'm going to quickly do a snapshot view. So a snapshot is great for historical data. For example, if I wanted to see the total profit from open deals last month versus this month, I would need historical data for that, because otherwise there'd be no way to know what deals were open last month, because some of them would have inevitably closed in the meantime. So I am going to give the table a name. And then the trick to a snapshot is you have to do the snapshot over a view. It can't be over a table itself. It has to be a view, like a pivot report or a summary report. The easiest way to do that is to create a summary table, drag the deal information that you're going to need. So in this case, the deal name, maybe the account, the stage, the amount, into that table, and then you can report on it historically, which is what I've done here. So in this example, we're doing month over month historical reporting. So I am going to pick monthly. And then which day of the week and the time. So before, where we encouraged you to sync data as often as possible, this is a little bit of a different case where you only want to sync it as necessary, because each snapshot here does count in towards rows in your license usage, and they don't stack the same way one table being synchronized would. It would be one snapshot after another. But you can choose how often these snapshots are retained. So you could choose to hold on to them forever. In this case, it makes a lot of sense to just hold on to them for a couple of months, because we're only comparing current month to the previous month. So I've gone ahead and created that, and that's going to be ready to report on in a little bit.